My name is Edna, and I'm 61 years old. Until 3 months ago, I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. I stood in my son Wade's pristine kitchen, my hands still damp from washing their dishes after Sunday lunch, when my daughter-in-law Fallon turned to me with that smile. You know the one, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that makes your stomach clench because you know something terrible is coming. Edna, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Since you're already cleaning up, would you mind taking care of the guest bathroom? It's gotten quite messy, and we're expecting Wade's boss for dinner tonight. I felt my cheeks burn. The guest bathroom. She wanted me to scrub toilets like I was the hired help. But what made it worse was the casual way she said it, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a mother to clean her son's bathroom while his wife supervised. I actually thought I might head home soon, I said quietly, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Robert is making his famous pot roast tonight and, oh, about that, Fallon interrupted, examining her perfectly manicured nails. You won't be joining us for dinner. Wade's boss is very particular about, well, appearances. We can't afford to have any embarrassment tonight. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the granite countertop, trying to steady myself. Embarrassment? Wade appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie after changing from church clothes. My heart lifted for just a moment, thinking my son would defend me, would tell his wife she'd gone too far. Instead, he nodded at Fallon's words. Mom, you have to understand. Fallon's right. You're unemployed right now, and honestly, he paused, running a hand through his hair. It wouldn't look good. Mr. Peterson expects a certain caliber of people at dinner. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, sacrificed everything for, and felt something inside me break. Not crack, not bend, but completely shatter into pieces so small I wondered if they could ever be put back together. A certain caliber? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. You know what I mean, Wade said, avoiding my eyes. Successful people. People with careers. It's nothing personal, Mom. Nothing personal. As if dismissing your mother like an unwanted servant could be anything but personal. Fallon clapped her hands together, as if the matter were settled. Wonderful. So you'll take care of the bathroom, and then maybe you could tidy up the living room before you go. Wade's boss will notice if things aren't perfect. I looked around the kitchen I'd helped them buy with the last of my savings when they first got married 5 years ago. The kitchen where I'd cooked Thanksgiving dinner for the past 3 years because Fallon wasn't good with traditional cooking. The kitchen where I'd spent countless evenings babysitting their neighbors' kids when they needed extra money for Fallon's shopping trips. The cleaning supplies are under the sink in the bathroom, Fallon continued, already turning away as if I'd agreed. Make sure you use the good toilet brush. The cheap one doesn't get the stains out properly. I stood there for a long moment, feeling invisible. They weren't even looking at me anymore. Wade had pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails. Fallon was arranging flowers in a vase, humming softly to herself. I thought about Robert, my husband of 8 months, waiting for me at home. He'd probably already started preparing dinner, the way he did every Sunday. He'd ask how my visit went. And what would I tell him? That my own son thinks I'm an embarrassment? That my daughter-in-law treats me like hired help? My feet moved without conscious thought, carrying me toward the guest bathroom. I found the cleaning supplies exactly where Fallon had said they'd be. The toilet was indeed dirty, crusted with God knows what, probably from one of Wade's weekend poker games with his buddies. I knelt on the cold tile floor, my 61-year-old knees protesting, and began to scrub. Each stroke of the brush felt like a piece of my dignity washing away. Tears dropped into the bowl, mixing with the cleaning solution. This wasn't supposed to be my life. I'd raised Wade to be better than this. I'd taught him about respect, about kindness, about treating people, especially family, with love and consideration. Where had I gone wrong? The sound of laughter drifted from the kitchen. Wade and Fallon probably planning their perfect dinner with Wade's perfect boss. I wondered if they even remembered I was here, or if I'd already faded into the background like an old piece of furniture they'd grown tired of looking at. I finished the toilet and moved to the sink, scrubbing away water spots that probably weren't even visible unless you looked for them. But Fallon would look. Fallon always looked for imperfections, especially in me. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, my back aching and my hands raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals, I found them in the living room. Wade was adjusting pillows that were already perfectly arranged. Fallon was spraying air freshener, though the house already smelled like the expensive candles she burned constantly. "All done," I announced, though neither of them acknowledged me. "Did you remember to clean behind the toilet?" Fallon asked without looking up. People always forget that part. "Yes," I said. "I cleaned everything." "Good." She finally glanced at me, her expression neutral. "You should probably head home now. We need time to prepare for dinner." I gathered my purse from the hall table, the same table where family photos should have been displayed. Instead, it held only pictures of Wade and Fallon, their wedding, their vacations, their perfect life together. No pictures of me, no pictures of Wade's childhood. It was as if his life had begun the day he married her. "I'll see you next Sunday?" I asked hopefully, knowing I shouldn't hope for anything anymore. Wade looked up from his phone. "Actually, Mom, maybe we should skip next week. Fallon's mother is coming to visit and you know how she is about. Well, about keeping things simple." Simple. Another word for without me. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and walked toward the door. My hand was on the knob when I heard Fallon laugh, a bright, careless sound that made my chest ache. "Wade, honey, your mother forgot to dust the coffee table. Look, you can see her fingerprints on the glass." I paused, my hand frozen on the door handle. Part of me wanted to turn around, to tell them both exactly what I thought of their cruelty. But the larger part of me, the part that had been worn down by months of subtle insults and casual dismissals, just wanted to escape. I stepped outside into the crisp October air, closing the door behind me with the softest click. As I walked to my car, I could hear them inside, already moving on with their day as if I'd never been there at all. The drive home was a blur of tears and traffic lights. I kept thinking about the look in Wade's eyes. Not cruel, exactly, but indifferent. As if I were a problem he'd solved by simply making me disappear. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw Robert in the kitchen window, probably checking on his pot roast. My husband, the man who'd somehow seen something worth loving in a broken-down 61-year-old woman with gray hair and too many regrets. I sat in the car for a few more minutes trying to compose myself. Robert would take one look at my face and know something was wrong. He always knew. And then he'd want to fix it. The way he fixed everything in our small house with such patience and care. But this wasn't something that could be fixed with a screwdriver and some elbow grease. This was my son, my only child, choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. This was 35 years of sacrifice reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and tried to smile. It felt like broken glass, but it would have to do. After all, what choice did I have? I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Fallon's smug face and heard Wade's casual dismissal. Robert had noticed my mood at dinner, of course. He always did. "Rough day with Wade?" he'd asked gently while we ate his pot roast. It was delicious, as always, but I could barely taste it. "Just tired," I'd lied. Because how do you tell the man you love that your own son thinks you're an embarrassment? Now, at 3 a.m, I found myself in our small living room, staring at the photo album I kept on the side table. It was old, with a cracked leather cover and pages that had yellowed around the edges. But every picture inside told the story of Wade's childhood, our life together before Fallon, before he learned to be ashamed of where he came from. The first photo was of Wade at 6 months old, chubby-cheeked and grinning toothlessly at the camera. His father, Mike, had taken that picture just 2 weeks before he walked out on us. Mike had said he wasn't ready to be a father, that the responsibility was too much pressure. I was 25 years old, working as a nurse at the county hospital, and suddenly I was completely alone with a baby. I turned the page, my fingers trembling slightly. Wade at 2 years old, sitting in a shopping cart at the grocery store. I remembered that day clearly because it was right after I'd been laid off from the hospital. Budget cuts, they said. But really, it was because the new administrator wanted to bring in his own people. I had exactly $47 in my checking account and a toddler to feed. That's when I took the first of what would become many, many side jobs. I cleaned offices at night after Wade went to bed, bringing him with me because I couldn't afford a babysitter. He'd sleep on a blanket in the corner while I vacuumed and scrubbed toilets. Not so different from what I'd done at his house today, except then I'd been doing it to survive, to keep us afloat. During the day, I waitressed at a diner downtown. The tips were decent, especially if you didn't mind the grabby hands of the regular customers. I minded, but I needed the money more than I needed my dignity. Wade would sit in a booth in the back, coloring in books I'd bought at the dollar store, while I served coffee and smiled at men who thought a single mother was fair game. The next photo showed Wade on his first day of kindergarten, standing proudly in front of our apartment complex. His backpack was too big for his small frame, and his shoes were from the thrift store, but I'd made sure his shirt was pressed and his hair was combed. He looked so eager, so ready to learn and grow and become something wonderful. I'd wanted to walk him to class that first day, but I had to be at work by 7 in the morning, so I walked him to the bus stop instead, kissed his forehead, and watched him climb those big steps with his oversized backpack. Then I ran to my car and cried for 10 minutes before driving to my shift at the diner. By the time Wade was in 2nd grade, I'd managed to land a job at a medical office. The pay was better, and I could work regular hours, which meant I could actually see Wade's school plays and parent-teacher conferences. But the cost of living kept rising, and Wade was growing so fast I could barely keep him in clothes and shoes. I flipped through more pages. Wade at 8, missing his 2 front teeth and holding up a baseball trophy. I'd worked extra shifts for 3 months to afford Little League registration and the equipment. Wade at 10, dressed as a historical figure for a school project. I'd stayed up all night making that costume because store-bought ones were beyond our budget. Every photo was a memory of something I'd worked for, saved for, sacrificed for. When Wade wanted piano lessons, I took on weekend shifts at a nursing home. When he needed a computer for high school, I sold my grandmother's jewelry, the only valuable thing I owned. The hardest photo to look at was Wade's high school graduation. He stood there in his cap and gown, smiling broadly, and I was so proud I thought my heart might burst. But I almost hadn't made it to the ceremony. I'd been working a double shift at the nursing home because one of the other aides had called in sick, and my supervisor initially refused to let me leave. I actually begged my supervisor to let me go see my son graduate. She finally agreed, but docked my pay for the missed hours. I didn't care. I wouldn't have missed that moment for anything. Wade had been accepted to State University on a partial academic scholarship, but it still wasn't enough to cover everything. So I took out loans I'm still paying off even now. I worked 3 jobs that summer to help with his expenses. My regular job at the medical office, weekend shifts at the nursing home, and a few hours each evening cleaning a lawyer's office downtown. I remember Wade calling me during his freshman year, homesick and struggling with the workload. "Maybe I should just come home," he'd said. "Get a job, help out with the bills." "Absolutely not," I'd told him. You stay right where you are and you finish what you started. I didn't work this hard to watch you quit now." The next section of the album showed Wade's college years, photos from his visits home, pictures from his graduation ceremony. He'd majored in business administration and graduated cum laude. I was so proud of him that day, watching him walk across that stage in his cap and gown. All those years of sacrifice had been worth it. My son was going to have the kind of life I'd never been able to give him. After graduation, Wade landed a good job at a marketing firm in the city. He was finally making decent money, finally able to afford his own apartment and car payments. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to relax just a little. Maybe I could finally start thinking about my own future, maybe even retirement someday. Then Wade met Fallon. She was beautiful, charming, and came from the kind of family that belonged to country clubs and took vacations to Europe. The first time Wade brought her home for dinner, I could see her taking inventory of our small apartment, noting the second-hand furniture and the faded carpet. She was polite enough, but I caught the way her eyes lingered on the cheap dinnerware and the generic brand food in my refrigerator. After they left that night, I found myself looking at my home through Fallon's eyes. Suddenly, everything seemed shabby and inadequate. The couch I'd been so proud to buy at a thrift store looked worn and pathetic. The kitchen table where Wade had done his homework for 12 years looked like exactly what it was, a piece of furniture someone else had discarded. Wade started visiting less frequently after that. When he did come by, he seemed embarrassed by things that had never bothered him before. He'd wince when I served dinner on my mismatched plates, or change the subject quickly when I mentioned my job at the medical office. The wedding was small and elegant, held at Fallon's family's country club. I'd worn my best dress, the navy blue one I'd bought for Wade's college graduation, and tried to blend into the background. I didn't belong there among Fallon's perfectly coiffed relatives and Wade's new circle of professional friends. During the reception, I overheard one of Fallon's aunts asking who I was. "Oh, that's Wade's mother," someone replied. Well, she did her best raising him alone, but you know how it is. He's really made something of himself despite everything. Despite everything. As if loving my son, working 3 jobs to support him, sacrificing everything to give him opportunities I'd never had. As if all of that was something he'd had to overcome rather than the foundation that made his success possible. I turned to the last page of the album. It was a recent photo. Wade and Fallon at some charity gala, dressed to the nines and looking like they belonged in a magazine. Wade looked confident and successful in his expensive suit. This was the life I'd wanted for him, the life all my sacrifices had made possible. So why did it hurt so much to see him living it? I closed the album and set it back on the table. The house was quiet except for the soft sound of Robert's breathing from our bedroom. My husband, this kind, gentle man, who'd somehow fallen in love with me despite everything I lacked. Tomorrow I'd have to face another day of being the embarrassment Wade didn't want his boss to meet. Another day of being treated like the help by a daughter-in-law who'd never worked a day in her life. Another day of pretending it didn't hurt when my own son looked at me like I was something to be ashamed of. But tonight, in the darkness of our living room, I allowed myself to remember when Wade looked at me like I was his whole world, when my love was enough, when my sacrifices mattered, when being his mother was the most important job I'd ever had. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, and maybe, I thought as I finally headed back to bed, they were. The next morning, I found Robert in our small kitchen, humming quietly as he prepared coffee. He was an early riser, always had been since I'd known him. At 65, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to appreciate quiet moments. His gray hair was still damp from his shower, and he wore the same style of button-down shirt he'd worn every day for the past 8 months. Nothing fancy, but always clean and pressed. "Morning, beautiful," he said without turning around, the way he did every morning. It still made my heart skip a little even after all this time. Nobody had called me beautiful in decades. "You're up early," I said, accepting the cup of coffee he handed me. He'd remembered how I liked it. 2 sugars, just a splash of cream. After 35 years of making coffee for Wade and getting nothing but complaints if it wasn't exactly right, Robert's attention to such small details felt like a luxury. "Couldn't sleep much either," he admitted, settling into the chair across from me. "You were tossing and turning all night. Want to talk about what really happened yesterday?" I studied his face over my coffee cup. Robert had these kind brown eyes that seemed to see right through any pretense. It was what had drawn me to him 8 months ago when we'd met at the grief support group at St. Mark's. I'd been there trying to process the loss of my job, the growing distance from Wade. He'd been there dealing with the death of his first wife, Margaret, after 42 years of marriage. We'd ended up sitting next to each other during one particularly difficult session about family disappointments. When the group leader asked us to share our biggest regrets, I'd found myself talking about Wade for the first time in months. How I felt like I'd somehow failed as a mother, like all my sacrifices had been worthless if they'd produced a son who was ashamed of me. Robert had listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything or offer hollow reassurances. After the meeting, he'd simply asked if I wanted to get coffee. That coffee had turned into dinner, which had turned into long walks and longer conversations. 6 months later, he'd proposed in my small living room, no fancy restaurant or dramatic gestures. Just him, down on one knee, asking if I wanted to try being happy for whatever time we had left. Wade hadn't even attended our small wedding ceremony. He'd claimed a work emergency, but I'd seen Fallon's social media posts from that same weekend. They'd gone to some wine festival in the mountains. Robert had squeezed my hand during the ceremony and whispered, "Their loss, sweetheart." Now, watching Robert sip his coffee in our sunny kitchen, I realized I'd never really told him the full truth about how Wade and Fallon treated me. I'd mentioned they were a bit snobbish and that Fallon could be difficult, but I'd never shared the depth of their cruelty. Maybe because saying it out loud would make it real in a way that was too painful to bear. "Fallon had me clean their guest bathroom yesterday," I said finally, the words coming out in a rush, on my hands and knees, scrubbing the toilet while she watched. And Wade. Wade said I couldn't stay for dinner because his boss was coming over and I would be an embarrassment. Robert's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, his jaw tightening in a way I'd never seen before. He said what? That I'm unemployed and it wouldn't look good to have me there. That his boss expects a certain caliber of people. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I spent 35 years raising that boy, Robert. I worked 3 jobs to put him through college. I gave him everything I had, and now he treats me like I'm some kind of burden he has to manage. Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. When he finally looked up, there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. "Edna, honey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I nodded, though something in his tone made me nervous. "What exactly did Wade tell you about where I worked before I retired?" The question caught me off guard. "You said you worked in technology. Something about medical devices, right?" Robert rubbed his temples, a gesture I'd come to recognize when he was working through a difficult problem. "I did work with medical devices, but I wasn't exactly, well, I wasn't just some regular employee." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our small backyard. "Margaret always said I was too modest for my own good. She used to get so frustrated when people would ask what I did for work. and I'd just say I worked with computers or helped with medical equipment. Robert, you're scaring me a little. What aren't you telling me? He turned back to me, and I could see him wrestling with something. The company I founded, that I built from nothing 25 years ago, it's called Fitztech Industries. The name meant nothing to me, but Robert seemed to expect some kind of reaction. Should I know what that is? It's one of the largest medical technology companies on the East Coast, Edna. We manufacture equipment for hospitals and clinics across 15 states. The company went public 12 years ago, and when I stepped down as CEO 3 years ago to take care of Margaret during her illness, we had over 8,000 employees. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. You're saying you owned a company? A big company? Own. Present tense. Robert's voice was gentle but firm. I still own 47% of the stock. The board handles day-to-day operations, but I'm still the largest single shareholder. The company is worth approximately $2 billion, Edna. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling dizzy. $2 billion? Give or take a few $100 million depending on the market. He said it so casually, like we were discussing the weather. When Margaret got sick, I stepped back from active management to spend time with her. After she passed, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life when I met you. You made me remember what it felt like to just be Robert, not Robert Fitzgerald, CEO and founder of Fitztech Industries. Just Robert. Fitzgerald? I repeated weakly. Your last name is Fitzgerald? I've been going by my middle name, Robert, since Margaret died. It felt like a fresh start. But legally, yes, I'm Robert Fitzgerald. Robert Fitzgerald. The name suddenly clicked into place, and I felt my world tilt sideways. I'd heard Wade mention that name dozens of times over the past few years. His company, Davidson Marketing, did contract work for several major corporations. Fitztech Industries was one of their biggest clients. Wade works for you, I whispered. His company works for your company. Not directly. Fitztech contracts with Davidson Marketing for our advertising campaigns. But yes, technically, his paycheck depends on contracts my company approves. Robert moved closer, kneeling beside my chair. Edna, I had no idea Wade was your son when we first met. You'd mentioned you had a son named Wade who worked in marketing, but I never made the connection until you started talking about his wife Fallon and their house in Millbrook Estates. I thought about Millbrook Estates, the expensive neighborhood where Wade and Fallon lived, with their pristine house and manicured lawn. The house I'd helped them buy with the last of my savings account. How long have you known? About 3 months. I was reviewing some employee files for our contractors when I saw Wade's full name and address. Wade Harrison Thompson. Same last name as you. Same address you'd mentioned visiting on Sundays. Robert took my hands in his. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you ever since. 3 months. He'd known for 3 months that my son worked for a company he owned, and he'd said nothing while I agonized over Wade's treatment of me. Yesterday, when Fallon was humiliating you, when Wade was calling you an embarrassment, Robert's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. They have no idea who they were talking about, do they? No idea that the woman they treated like hired help is married to the man who signs their paychecks. I shook my head, still trying to absorb everything. They think you're just some retired guy I met at grief counseling. Fallon called you that old man when Wade told her we were getting married. Robert's laugh was sharp and humorless. That old man. Well, this old man is going to have a very interesting conversation with the Davidson marketing team this week. We're currently negotiating a 3-year contract extension worth about $15 million. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Wade's entire career, his beautiful house, his comfortable lifestyle, all of it depended on contracts from Robert's company. And Wade had no idea that the man he'd dismissed as beneath his notice could destroy everything he'd worked for with a single phone call. Robert, no. I stood up quickly, nearly knocking over my chair. You can't use your position to get back at them for how they treated me. That's not right. He looked at me with something that might have been admiration. Even after what they did to you yesterday? Even after Wade called you an embarrassment and Fallon made you scrub toilets like a servant? They're still my family, I said, though the words felt hollow. And I didn't marry you for your money. I married you because you're kind and gentle, and you see something good in me that I'd forgotten was there. I won't let this change that. Robert stood and pulled me into his arms. That's exactly why I love you, Edna Thompson Fitzgerald. That's exactly why. We held each other in our small kitchen while the morning sun streamed through the windows. But even as I felt the comfort of Robert's embrace, I couldn't stop thinking about Wade and Fallon, going about their perfect lives with no idea that everything they'd built was balanced on the goodwill of the man they'd treated as insignificant. Part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, wondered what would happen when they found out the truth. By Thursday, I'd almost convinced myself that Robert would never have to reveal his identity to Wade and Fallon. We could keep living our quiet life, and they could keep living theirs, and maybe the two worlds would never have to collide again. I was wrong. It started with a phone call at 2:30 in the afternoon. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I heard Robert answer his cell phone in the living room. Yes, this is Robert Fitzgerald. His voice had taken on a tone I'd never heard before. Crisp, authoritative, nothing like the gentle man who made me coffee every morning. What kind of emergency? I stopped folding and moved closer to the doorway, not meaning to eavesdrop but unable to help myself. How many people? Robert asked, and I could hear the tension building in his voice. Jesus Christ, Marcus. How did this happen? No, don't answer that yet. I'm coming in. Cancel my afternoon and reschedule the board dinner for tomorrow night. I heard his phone snap shut and his footsteps moving quickly toward the bedroom. When he appeared in the doorway, his face was pale and drawn. There's been an accident at the main production facility, he said, already moving toward our closet. A malfunction with one of the sterilization units. 6 workers were hospitalized with chemical burns. I watched him pull out a dark suit I'd never seen him wear. Expensive looking, perfectly tailored. Robert, that's terrible. Are they going to be okay? I don't know yet, but I need to get to the facility, and then to the hospital, and then I'll probably be in meetings with lawyers and insurance people until God knows when. He was transforming before my eyes, becoming someone I didn't recognize. This wasn't my gentle, retired husband. This was a man used to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Can I do anything to help? He paused in the middle of adjusting his tie and looked at me with so much love it made my chest ache. Just be here when I get home, okay? This day just got very complicated, and I'm going to need to see your face at the end of it. I kissed him goodbye and watched him drive away in his truck. The same old Ford pickup he'd driven since we met, though now I wondered if he had other cars I didn't know about. The call came at 7:15 that evening. Mom? Wade's voice was strained, panicked in a way I hadn't heard since he was a child. Mom, I need your help. I gripped the phone tighter. What's wrong? It's... God, Mom. I don't even know how to explain this. There was an accident at Fitztech Industries today. 6 people got hurt, and now there's going to be all kinds of investigations and lawsuits, and our entire contract with them might be in jeopardy. My stomach dropped. Your contract? Fitztech is our biggest client, Mom. We do 70% of our marketing work for them. If they pull their contract because of this accident and the bad publicity, Davidson Marketing could go under. I could lose my job, the house, everything. I closed my eyes, thinking of Robert at the hospital, probably sitting beside the beds of injured workers, trying to make sure they got the best possible care. Wade, I'm sure it's not as bad as you think. Accidents happen and— No, Mom, you don't understand. His voice cracked like a teenager's. Mr. Peterson, my boss, he got a call from FitzTech's legal department today. They want a meeting tomorrow morning with all the senior staff from our company. Peterson thinks they're going to terminate our contract. I found myself pacing our small living room, the phone pressed against my ear. What do you want me to do, Wade? I don't understand why you're calling me about this. I need to borrow money, he said in a rush. If I lose this job, Fallon and I won't be able to make the mortgage payments. We'll lose the house and God, Mom, she'll leave me. She married me because I could provide for her, and if I can't— How much money? I asked, though I already knew I didn't have whatever amount he was going to ask for. $20,000, just as a bridge loan until I can find another job. I know you don't have that much in savings, but maybe Robert could co-sign on a loan or something. I'm desperate, Mom. I'm really desperate. $20,000. The number hit me like a slap. Wade, who'd been too embarrassed to let me meet his boss 3 days ago, was now asking for $20,000 from the woman he'd forced to scrub his toilets. Wade, Robert and I don't have that kind of money just sitting around. Please, Mom. He was crying now, actually crying. I know I haven't been the best son lately. I know Fallon can be difficult, but I need help. And you're the only family I have. The only family he had. Apparently, I was family again when he needed something. I was still trying to figure out what to say when I heard Robert's truck in the driveway. Wade, let me talk to Robert when he gets home. I can't promise anything, but— Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much. I'll call you tomorrow morning, okay? Before the meeting with FitzTech. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in our living room with my heart pounding and my mind racing. Robert looked exhausted when he walked through the door. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and there were coffee stains on his shirt. He looked older than his 65 years, weighed down by the kind of responsibility I was only beginning to understand. How are the workers? I asked immediately. They'll be okay. Burns were mostly superficial, thank God, though 2 of them will need skin grafts. I've arranged for the company to cover all medical expenses, plus additional compensation for pain and suffering. It was a malfunction in equipment that should have been replaced last year, so this is entirely on us. He sank into his armchair with a heavy sigh. I spent 4 hours at the hospital, then another 3 hours with lawyers and the board of directors. Tomorrow is going to be even worse. We have meetings with all our major contractors to reassure them that this won't affect our ability to fulfill our obligations. I perched on the arm of his chair, running my fingers through his gray hair. Wade called. Robert's eyes sharpened immediately. What did he want? I told him about the phone call, about Wade's panic over losing the FitzTech contract, about his request for $20,000. Robert listened without interruption, his expression growing harder with each detail. He wants $20,000, Robert repeated when I finished. From you, the woman he called an embarrassment 4 days ago. He's scared, Robert. His whole life is built on that job. His whole life is built on my company's good faith, whether he knows it or not. Robert's voice was cold in a way that made me shiver, and now he wants the woman he humiliated to bail him out of a problem that wouldn't exist if he'd shown his mother an ounce of respect. I could see the anger building in him, and it frightened me a little. This was the man who commanded boardrooms and made decisions worth millions of dollars. This was the man my son had no idea existed. What are you going to do? Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I'm going to go to that meeting tomorrow morning. The meeting with Davidson Marketing? Yes. I'm going to sit in that conference room and listen to Wade and his boss explain why FitzTech Industries should continue our partnership with their company. Robert looked at me, and I could see the decision forming in his eyes. And then I'm going to tell them exactly who I am. My heart started racing. Robert, no, you can't. I can't what, Edna? I can't reveal my identity to save my wife from being humiliated by her own son? I can't use my position to teach a lesson to a man who thinks he's too good to let his unemployed mother meet his boss. It's not about revenge, I said desperately. You said yourself that you love me because I'm not vindictive, because I don't want to hurt them even after what they did to me. Robert stood up and began pacing, his movements sharp and agitated. This isn't about revenge, sweetheart. This is about respect. This is about a man who needs to understand that the woman he treated like hired help is worth more than his entire company. I followed him to the kitchen, where he was opening and closing cabinet doors without really looking for anything. What if it backfires? What if Wade and Fallon resent me even more after they find out I knew who you were and didn't tell them? And then they'll resent you for something real instead of resenting you for being poor and unemployed and inconvenient. Robert turned to face me, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. Edna, I've watched you suffer for months over the way they treat you. I've seen you cry yourself to sleep because your own son is ashamed of you. Well, tomorrow morning he's going to find out exactly what kind of woman he's been ashaming. I wanted to argue more, wanted to find some way to talk him out of this course of action. But part of me, the part that had scrubbed Wade's toilet while Fallon supervised, was curious to see their faces when they learned the truth. What will you tell them? I asked quietly. Robert's smile was sharp as a blade. I'll tell them the truth, that Robert Fitzgerald, founder and majority owner of Fitztech Industries, is married to the woman they wouldn't let stay for dinner because she might embarrass them in front of the boss. He moved closer to me, taking my hands in his. And then I'll let them decide whether they think their contract is worth an apology to my wife. I looked into his eyes and saw not just anger, but love. Fierce, protective love that I'd never experienced before. For 35 years, I'd fought my battles alone. Tomorrow, for the first time, someone would be fighting for me. Okay, I whispered, but promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens tomorrow, no matter how they react, we'll still be us. We'll still be the couple who drinks coffee in the kitchen and talks about everything and nothing. Promise me this won't change who we are together. Robert cupped my face in his hands and kissed me softly. Nothing could change that, Edna. Nothing in the world. As we stood there in our small kitchen, holding each other in the gathering darkness, I realized that tomorrow would either repair my relationship with Wade forever or destroy it completely. Either way, I would finally know where I stood. I didn't sleep at all Thursday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the scene that would unfold at Davidson Marketing's offices in just a few hours. Robert, meanwhile, had slept like a man who'd finally made peace with a difficult decision. He woke up at his usual time, made coffee, and went about his morning routine as if this were any other day. You don't have to do this, I told him over breakfast, making one last attempt to change his mind. He looked up from his newspaper, the business section I noted, where he probably kept track of companies he owned shares in, and gave me that gentle smile that had made me fall in love with him. Yes, I do, sweetheart. Some things can't be ignored anymore. At 8:30, Robert kissed me goodbye and climbed into his old Ford pickup truck, but this morning, he was wearing one of his expensive suits and carrying a leather briefcase I'd never seen before. The transformation from my quiet, retired husband to Robert Fitzgerald's CEO was complete. I spent the morning cleaning our already spotless house, doing laundry that didn't need doing, anything to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. At 10:15, my phone rang. Mom? Wade's voice was shaky. The Fitztech people are here. Mr. Peterson wants me in the conference room in 5 minutes. How are you feeling? Terrified, he admitted. Mom, about what I said the other day, about you being an embarrassment. I was stressed about work, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it was closer than anything I'd gotten from Wade in years. I know you're under a lot of pressure, honey. I have to go, but Mom, thank you for listening last night. It meant a lot that I could call you. The line went dead, and I was left holding the phone, my heart breaking a little. Wade sounded so young, so scared. Part of me wanted to call Robert and tell him to be gentle, that my son was suffering enough already. But then I remembered the feel of the toilet brush in my hands, the sound of Fallon's laughter as she dismissed me like hired help, the look in Wade's eyes when he called me an embarrassment. Some lessons, I realized, could only be learned the hard way. At 11:45, my phone rang again. Edna. Robert's voice was calm, controlled, but I could hear something underneath it, a kind of satisfied exhaustion. It's over. What happened? I'll tell you everything when I get home, but Edna, Wade is going to call you, probably in the next few minutes, and he's going to be very, very upset. My stomach clenched. What did you do? I told him the truth, all of it. Before I could ask what that meant, I heard the dial tone. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone was ringing again. Mom. Wade's voice was barely recognizable, raw, shocked, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Mom, we need to talk, right now. Wade, what? I'm coming over. Don't go anywhere. Just don't go anywhere. He hung up, leaving me standing in my kitchen with my heart pounding and my mind spinning. Robert had said it was over, but from the sound of Wade's voice, it felt like something was just beginning. Wade's BMW pulled into our driveway 20 minutes later, moving faster than was safe for our quiet neighborhood. I watched through the kitchen window as he sat in his car for a long moment, his head in his hands. When he finally got out, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. He didn't knock. He never knocked anymore. Another small courtesy that had disappeared over the years. He just walked in, looked around our modest living room like he was seeing it for the first time, and then stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Is it true? He asked. Is what true? Don't. His voice cracked. Don't make me say it. Just tell me if it's true. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. If you're asking whether Robert is Robert Fitzgerald, the founder of Fitztech Industries, then yes, it's true. Wade sank into Robert's armchair, the same chair where I'd watched my husband transform into a CEO this morning. For a long moment, he just sat there, breathing hard like he'd run a marathon. How long have you known? He finally asked. 3 months, since shortly after you told me I couldn't meet your boss because I'd be an embarrassment. Wade flinched as if I'd slapped him. Mom, let me tell you what happened in that conference room today, I continued, my voice surprisingly steady, because I think you need to hear it from me. You weren't there. No, but Robert called me immediately afterward, and he told me everything. I moved to the couch, sitting across from my son, this man I'd raised who looked so much smaller and younger than his 35 years. He told me how Mr. Peterson introduced everyone from Davidson Marketing, including you. How the Fitztech legal team started explaining the implications of yesterday's accident. How you kept looking at your phone, probably hoping I'd call back about that $20,000 you need. Wade's face went even paler. And then Robert stood up and said he wanted to address something personal before they continued with business. I leaned forward, holding Wade's gaze. He told them that he'd recently learned that one of Davidson Marketing's employees was married to his wife, a woman who had been treated so poorly by her own son that she'd been reduced to scrubbing toilets while her daughter-in-law watched. Oh, God. Wade put his head in his hands. He told them about last Sunday, Wade. About how you made me clean the guest bathroom and then told me I couldn't stay for dinner because your boss was coming and I would be an embarrassment. He told them that the boss your wife was so worried about impressing was actually married to the woman you'd humiliated. Please stop. But I couldn't stop. For months I'd swallowed my hurt and disappointment, made excuses for Wade's behavior, convinced myself that he was just going through a difficult phase. Now finally, the truth was spilling out of me like water through a broken dam. Do you know what he said next, Wade? He said that any company that employed someone who treated his wife with such disrespect wasn't a company Fitztech Industries could continue to work with. Wade's head snapped up. He's canceling our contract? No, I said quietly. He gave you a choice. Either you could stand up in front of your boss and your co-workers and apologize to your mother for your behavior, acknowledging that you'd been wrong to treat me the way you have, or Fitztech would terminate their relationship with Davidson Marketing effective immediately. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Wade stared at me like I was a stranger, like he was trying to reconcile the unemployed, embarrassing mother he'd known with the wife of one of the most powerful men in the state. "What did I do?" he whispered. "What do you think you did?" I apologized. In front of everyone. Mr. Peterson, the entire senior staff, the Fitztech legal team. His voice was barely audible. I told them all that I'd been treating my mother badly, that she'd sacrificed everything for me, and I'd repaid her with cruelty and disrespect. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "And how did that make you feel?" Wade was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "Humiliated," he finally admitted. "Ashamed. Like everyone in that room could see exactly what kind of person I really am. Now you know how I felt last Sunday." He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my little boy in his eyes. Not the successful businessman or Fallon's husband, but the child I'd raised, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I am so sorry." The words came out broken, desperate. "I don't know what happened to me. I don't know when I became someone who could treat you like that." "I know when it happened," I said quietly. "It happened when you decided that your mother's love wasn't worth as much as Fallon's approval. When you decided that the woman who raised you was somehow less valuable than the woman you married." Wade was crying now, not the quiet tears of regret, but the ugly, choking sobs of someone whose world has just collapsed around them. "She's going to leave me, Mom. When Fallon finds out what happened today, when she realizes that I humiliated her in front of my co-workers, she's going to leave me." Part of me wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay the way I had when he was small. But I was tired of making things okay for Wade while he made things difficult for me. "Maybe she will," I said instead. "And maybe that would be for the best." He looked at me in shock. "How can you say that?" "Because any woman who would leave her husband for standing up for his mother isn't a woman worth keeping." I leaned back against the couch cushions, feeling oddly calm. "Wade, for 35 years I put you first in everything. Every decision I made was about what was best for you. I worked jobs I hated, lived in apartments I couldn't afford, went without things I needed so that you could have things you wanted." "I know that, Mom. I've always known that." "No, you haven't. If you'd known that, really known that, you never would have treated me the way you did last Sunday. You never would have looked at the woman who sacrificed everything for you and decided she was an embarrassment." Wade wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, looking lost. "What do I do now?" "That depends. Do you want to be the kind of man who's married to someone who would leave him for showing respect to his mother? Or do you want to be the kind of man who chooses his family over his convenience?" Before Wade could answer, I heard Robert's truck in the driveway. A moment later, my husband walked through the door, looking tired but somehow lighter than he had in months. "Wade," Robert said with a polite nod. "Mr. Fitzgerald." Wade stood up quickly, like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. I owe you an apology, too, for the way I treated your wife, for the way I treated my mother. Robert studied Wade for a long moment. You don't owe me anything, son. The apology you owe is to her. Wade turned back to me, his eyes still red from crying. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the successful businessman who'd been ashamed of me, but the scared little boy who needed his mother to tell him everything would be all right. The first thing you need to do, I said quietly, is decide what kind of man you want to be. And then you need to decide what kind of marriage you want to have. Wade nodded, though I wasn't sure he fully understood what I meant yet, but he would. One way or another, he would. 3 months have passed since that day in Davidson Marketing's conference room, and I'm sitting in my favorite chair in our living room, watching Robert tend to the small garden he's planted in our backyard. It's Saturday morning, and he's wearing his old clothes, faded jeans and a t-shirt that's seen better days. This is the Robert I fell in love with, the one who finds joy in simple things like watching tomatoes grow. The changes in our lives have been gradual but profound. Robert officially retired from active involvement in Fitztech Industries 2 weeks after the confrontation with Wade, selling his remaining shares to the board of directors. He said he was tired of carrying the weight of other people's livelihoods and wanted to spend whatever years he had left focused on his own happiness. Are you sure? I'd asked him when he first mentioned the idea. That company is your life's work. No, sweetheart, he'd replied, pulling me close. You are my life's work now. We're comfortable. More than comfortable, actually. The sale of Robert's shares left us with more money than we could spend in 3 lifetimes. But we still live in the same small house, still drink coffee at the same kitchen table, still find our greatest pleasure in each other's quiet company. The only real change is that I no longer worry about money. When the water heater broke last month, Robert simply called a plumber instead of trying to fix it himself. When I mentioned wanting to take a cooking class, he signed us both up for a series at the community college. Small luxuries, but they feel enormous to a woman who spent 35 years counting every penny. Wade has been coming to Sunday dinner for the past 2 months. Not to our house. I wasn't ready for that yet. Instead, we meet at a small restaurant downtown, neutral territory where we can slowly rebuild our relationship without the weight of too much history pressing down on us. He comes alone. Fallon filed for divorce 6 weeks ago. Wade had been right about her reaction to what happened at Davidson Marketing. She'd been furious, not because her husband had humiliated her, but because he'd chosen his mother over maintaining their carefully constructed social image. The final straw had come when Fallon learned that I was now married to a man worth more than $20 million. She said I was an idiot for not realizing what I had, Wade told me during one of our dinners. She couldn't understand how I'd been stupid enough to alienate the mother-in-law who could have given us everything we wanted. I'd watched my son's face as he said this, looking for signs of regret or longing for his failed marriage. Instead, I saw something that looked almost like relief. Do you miss her? I'd asked. Wade had considered the question seriously, the way he was learning to consider all questions about his life and choices. I miss the idea of her. I miss having someone to come home to, but the person I thought I was married to, I don't think she ever really existed. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Fallon had demanded half of everything, including half the value of the house I'd helped Wade buy with my savings. When she'd learned that Wade couldn't afford to buy out her share, she'd forced the sale. Wade now lives in a small apartment across town, not unlike the places I'd lived when he was growing up. It's strange, he'd told me last Sunday. I keep waiting to feel sorry for myself about losing the house and most of my savings, but mostly I just feel free, like I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not anymore. The man who's been coming to our dinners is different from the Wade I'd known for the past few years. He's more thoughtful, more genuine. He asks about my life, really asks, and listens to the answers. He tells me about his work, about the books he's reading, about the therapist he's started seeing to understand how he became someone who could treat his mother so poorly. She says I was so focused on becoming successful that I forgot to become a good person, he'd explained 2 weeks ago. She says I confused material success with personal worth, and I applied that confusion to everyone around me, including you. I'd nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It was the most honest thing Wade had said to me in years. Robert has been patient about my rebuilding relationship with Wade, but he's also been protective in ways I'm still learning to appreciate. When Wade expressed interest in working for another company that contracted with FitzTech, Robert had quietly put the word out that Wade Thompson was not to be given any special consideration because of his connection to the Fitzgerald family. He needs to rebuild his career on his own merit, Robert had explained to me. If I help him now, he'll never know if his success is real or just another handout. Wade had been disappointed when the job interviews hadn't led to offers, but he'd accepted Robert's reasoning with more grace than I'd expected. He'd eventually found a position with a smaller marketing firm, less prestigious than his previous job, and significantly less money, but honest work that he'd earned entirely on his own. This morning, as I watch Robert water his tomato plants, my phone rings. It's Wade, calling earlier than usual for our weekly check-in. "Hi, Mom. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all. We're just having coffee and watching Robert garden. What's on your mind?" There's a pause, and I can hear something different in Wade's voice when he speaks again. "I wanted to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me, even if you think it might hurt my feelings." I glance out at Robert, who's now kneeling beside his pepper plants. "Okay, what is it?" "Do you think there's a chance that we can have a real relationship again? Not just these polite dinners where we catch up on surface things, but a real mother-son relationship where we actually matter to each other?" The question catches me off guard, not because I haven't been wondering the same thing, but because I hadn't expected Wade to be the one to bring it up. "I think," I say slowly, "that depends on whether you want a relationship with who I actually am, or with who you think I should be." "I want to know who you actually are," Wade says immediately. "I want to know about the woman who worked 3 jobs to put me through college. I want to know about the years when you were struggling and scared and I was too selfish to notice. I want to know about how you met Robert, and what made you fall in love with him, and what your life was like before I became too important to appreciate you." I feel tears starting to form in my eyes. "Wade, I know I can't undo the way I treated you, Mom. I know I can't take back the things I said or the way I made you feel. But I want to try to become the son you deserved all along." Through the kitchen window, I see Robert stand up and dust the dirt off his hands. He looks toward the house and waves when he sees me watching him. This man who could have destroyed my son's career with a phone call, but instead chose to teach him a lesson about respect and consequences. "Would you like to come to dinner tomorrow?" I ask Wade. "Here, at the house. I'll make pot roast." The silence stretches so long that I wonder if we've been disconnected. When Wade finally speaks, his voice is thick with emotion. "I would love that, Mom, more than you know." After we hang up, I sit in my chair for a while, thinking about the journey that brought us to this moment. A year ago, I was a 61-year-old woman who'd lost her job and her sense of purpose, whose only child treated her like an inconvenience. I felt invisible, worthless, forgotten by the world and the people who should have loved me most. Today, I am Robert Fitzgerald's wife. I am a woman who is loved and valued and protected, but more importantly, I am a woman who has learned to value herself. Robert comes inside. his hands dirty from the garden and a satisfied smile on his face. "The tomatoes are coming along beautifully," he announces. "We should have fresh ones by the end of the month." "Wade is coming to dinner tomorrow," I tell him. Robert's smile softens. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. How do you feel about that?" I consider the question seriously, the way Wade has been learning to consider questions about his life. "Hopeful," I say finally. "Cautiously hopeful." Robert leans down and kisses the top of my head. That's the perfect way to feel. As evening approaches, we sit together on our small back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Robert holds my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm the way he has every evening since we've been married. "Any regrets?" he asks quietly. I think about the question. Do I regret the confrontation that changed everything? Do I regret the years of struggle and sacrifice? Do I regret the pain that was necessary for Wade to become the man he's trying to be now? No, I say. And I'm surprised to realize I mean it completely. No regrets at all. Tomorrow, my son will come to dinner in the home I share with my husband. We'll eat the pot roast Robert will help me prepare, and we'll talk about our lives and our hopes, and maybe even our fears. Wade will see the photo album on the side table, the one filled with pictures of his childhood, and maybe he'll remember what it felt like when my love was enough for him. It won't be the same as it was when he was small. We can't go back to those simple days when his mother was his whole world and he was mine. But we can build something new, something honest, something based on who we actually are, rather than who we think we should be. And for the first time in years, that feels like enough. It feels like everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.